Oh,
Well, hi
we're
there.
live. Hello.
Good morning, and welcome to the latest episode of the Project Failure Files. This series is for anyone who manages projects or project teams for a living. I'm Sharon Weaver, CEO of Smarter Consulting.
And I am Christian Buckley, founder of Collab Talk. And welcome to another episode of our series where Sharon and I, we explore project management topics from the perspective of what not to do as you manage projects. In each episode, we talk about the common pitfalls. We share personal stories and experiences because we've made all the mistakes. But for you, for our audience, we had a purpose in making mistakes and explore the strategies and best practices to help you to be successful.
In this episode, we are going to talk about navigating resource constraints. In other words, we're going to talk about strategies for managing projects effectively under the three main constraints that a PM faces: time, budget, and personnel.
Specifically, we're going to talk about a compacted schedule, a limited budget, and not enough personnel.
I mean, that sounds more accurate and more normal.
Right.
Most of the time.
Yeah. Most of the time,
that is the case.
Problems. Yeah.
However, once in a while, there is a project that has a healthy budget, all of the correct resources, and definitely plenty of time to complete all the tasks.
And then you wake up.
Yeah, well, I guess we focus on the real world stuff.
Yeah. That should be, as always, a great conversation. And with every episode, please feel free to comment throughout the episode and share your experiences, any great examples or feedback that we may have missed, because we do follow up. We'd love to get that feedback.
All right, let's get started with definitions and why resource constraints are very common.
What the number one reason why they're so common is because the leadership asks for too much. They have unrealistic expectations. I especially love, and we've covered in other episodes, like scope creep, where they say, well, how long will it take you to do this? You go and you do your planning, your estimation, you come back, you say, all right, 6 weeks to do this. Here's the budget. Here's the people that I need. All right. Well, you can have half the people that you need. You can have half of the budget, but I need it in 2 weeks.
Yeah, I think that's very, very common. I see that a lot. And I think other common things are, I don't think teams always know like where their people fit and what resources are actually capable of doing which things. And so like there is kind of a level of, from an HR management perspective, not always putting the right resources in the right places where they can be the most efficient. And so then, you're kind of like running this project and you think you have the right resources, or you think that the resources are capable of doing the things you need them to do. And then when you get into it, you find out that, maybe they've got other things that are assigned to them you didn't know about, or maybe they don't have the skill set that you thought they had. You kind of walk into something and I think a lot of times it's not set up properly the way you think it should be.
Well, I've seen, experienced a number of these kind of constraints, but the one that is most common in my experience is what you just nailed, is the fact that, okay, we have 4 people that are assigned for this, but it's usually done with the most optimistic view of the world, and doesn't recognize that each of those 4 people one has a planned vacation, another one could have her baby at any day, has planned time off, will be gone for 3 months. Others has just other projects that they're working between, like all those kinds of the real world examples around those resources. And there's not sufficient backup for that. And so you have an overly optimistic plan for that. But so that's where I've had conversations with people, especially senior leaders, that are like, I need this. It's like, well, then give me more funds. Or if I can go hire some contractors, I can get this done. Or let's deprioritize these other projects and pull people over for this. There's only so much that we can do realistically with the hands that we have.
Yep. That's every single time. There's always something that's not exactly what we expected or not exactly what we planned. And so you end up juggling, right? Like with resource management, it's something that I think we've talked about this in the past, but the idea that if something can go wrong, it will go wrong. It's that whole planning for contingency thing. And I think resource management is no different when we talk about risks. I think resource management is probably a gigantic risk for most projects, unless it's like exactly the same people doing exactly the same thing where you've done it a bazillion times, which is very, very rare. Then you don't know what you're up against.
Yeah. It's, and sometimes not to jump to solutions here, but we're going to get into this a bit more depth, but sometimes if you're just able to set the right expectations around that, like I've had some projects where, the leaders were realistic. They knew that they were asking for a lot and we do our best, but that, maybe we're not going to be able to hit that deadline, or we need to reduce the scope of what's being asked for. The other downsides are that you have employees then that get burned out because then they feel the weight, the pressure of that. And you're asking them to go above and beyond and outside of the 8-hour workday, and they just can't because they're trying to maintain the same level of work with the other projects. And so they get burned out. Stakeholders become dissatisfied. So this is a real problem.
And then there's always so this is my funnest one, I think, out of all of it is many years ago, I got hired into a team, and they're like, here's a government contract to do this gigantic project, and here's the recruiter, and we're going to be bringing all the people on board for this project over the course of the next, 10 days to 3 weeks. And we want you to ramp them up and get the project going like right away. And so as they're deciding the company's deciding who's getting hired. I'm onboarding them and making sure that they fill the gaps in this project. And I literally have no idea who they're even hiring. All I know is that they're like being onboarded, and my job is to get them up to speed on the project, like the day that they're hired, and get them productive.
Yeah.
And so, even if it's not one of those other things, then there's always going to be something fun that's thrown at you around resources that you just never even thought to expect.
But I've had that experience where I was trying to hire somebody, and one of the executives hired somebody, and then I was like, it dropped in my lap that I'm like, I've never even talked to this person. You just filled the role that I've been interviewing for, and then had to deal with this person who ended up being really good, but didn't have experience in a couple key areas.
This is our project failure file example. Is like, we have this experience from all the times that people have done things where we're like, that is the way to not do it.
Right. Yeah, that's the wrong way. Well, so thinking of two, maybe we break this up into, let's talk about time, budget, personnel, and competing priorities, kind of those 4 things. What's the wrong way to handle the time limitations?
I think, this is when we go back and talk about risks. I think, just assume that you have all the time in the world, and that like deadlines, schmedlines. Why does that even matter? Just, however long it takes you to do something, that's how long it is.
Well, I was thinking of slightly different of the, no matter how much the reality is, as you're getting the specifics, the specificity of your plan, you start getting the detail of what actually has to happen to get that done without adjusting the schedule.
Yes.
So,
yes.
Or as the scope gets at, oh yeah, we could do that. And then not talking to your team, there's a thing not to do.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I mean, because, the team probably doesn't mind really working 22 hours a day for each individual resource. So like, why would you need to update the schedule anyways?
I got 2 hands. That's right.
Yeah, it'll be fine.
On the budget constraints too, it's something where, the mistake made is to not be transparent about the cost of the different pieces. Not realistic about what it'll cost for that additional software, or pushing that off. So you've signed on to things and to personnel and to deadlines without factoring in those additional costs.
And also don't bother to look at the budget along the way, because, budget really is never ending. And all you have to do is just go ask for more money and they'll be happy to give you more money at any point along the way, because, spending it is not a problem. So, the right answer is really make sure you're keeping up with it because, you do have to budget and you do have to estimate and you have to plan. But I think the wrong way is just go along and don't pay attention to it. It'll all work itself out.
Well, the wrong way with personnel on a similar areas is that, hey, they're already stretched to capacity. What's a little more stretching? Who doesn't like stretching? It's part of warming up, right?
Yes, absolutely. And also assume that they all want to do every single thing that's on the project. Yes. And they're probably all cross-trained on everything anyways. So if you've got multiple tasks, like you can legitimately put each person on the right thing and it'll work out just fine.
I love that t-shirt, the poster, the meme, whatever it is the flogging will continue until a morale improves.
Yes. And also there will be no rework.
Oh yeah. Well, just don't build that in the plan.
Correct. Everything will go
all right the first time.
Correct.
And then you have the little issue of the competing priorities across projects. And the wrong approach for that is that, well, everybody's good at multitasking. So what's the problem?
Well, and also just remember we can be in multiple time space continuums at the same time. So
we learned that from Marvel. That's right. We can.
When you say to me, hey, by the way, can you do this task, and this task all on the same day? And I go, absolutely. Then I will physically be in 3 locations at once.
I'm going to, so when we saw the technology, Hermione Granger used it in the Harry Potter movies of that. What was the name of that?
It's a time turner.
That's right.
Well, because I have one.
There you go. Right there. See, I was going to say, just go on to Amazon, buy one for everyone on the team, and go back and
now you know my secret for how I get everything done. I have a time turner hanging right here just in case I need it.
See, I need a time turner, right? I went with the old-fashioned ADHD. So that's what. In fact, I just saw something. I was going to share this. I forgot. I was going to share it with you and Jonathan. But it was like the three work habits of somebody with ADHD, and it was one. There's 4 hours of, or it's like 8 hours of work, and 8 hours of nothing got done. The next one was I worked for 4 hours, and then I was exhausted, gave up. And then the third method is I worked for 4 hours and got 24 hours of work done.
That sounds 100% accurate.
Yeah.
So speaking of optimizing our resources,
yes,
and keeping them on task.
Everybody gets ADHD. Everybody, it gets heavily caffeinated so that they can the output increases. They get more done. No, it's thinking about strategies for this though. When you're trying to manage across limited resources, it's just the reality. Probably the hardest thing to do, and it is for me personally, is prioritizing those critical tasks.
Yeah,
what must get done.
In fact, I will tell you, and I know this from a lot of experience of working at small software startup businesses, is that when you have multiple stakeholders, especially stakeholders that are global, that like to call you at 2:00 in the morning from other countries, that like to fight over their priorities, this gets to be a big deal as a project manager, because it's not just even the project that you're working on. It is often you've got multiple people asking for the different things from the same resource. And so there has to be some sort of strategy around how you decide what is priority, who gets priority treatment, how the backlog is managed. And if you've got multiple backlogs and multiple stakeholders and multiple priorities, you have to have a system that everybody's on the same page. Otherwise, everybody's going to get dragged into different things by different people.
Well, I've shared this in past episodes. I know the last couple episodes as we've been talking about planning and these things come up, but we both have very similar backgrounds, but we've done a similar, what is it called, a trick, but a method where so I have a lot of experience running shared services teams. And so you have project managers and business analysts and engineers and contractors and full-time employees, kind of all of the above. And where you have all of these competing priorities that are coming in, and these owners like everywhere, and people that are working on a dozen different projects and running in different directions and getting frustrated. And when they organizationally, we're struggling with keeping everybody on task and that prioritization, where we went to doing the stand-up meeting, which was typically 10, 15 minutes long at most, but every morning. And we tried to slow it down and simplify it to where, I'll repeat this if you've not seen the back episodes, we've talked about it a couple times. So I know that Sharon's done this, I've done this, we've talked about it professionally out as consultants as well. But where I went and literally, like I talked about the one experience where I went and purchased a whiteboard and placed it on the wall in the hallway right off of the elevator, so that the teams that we supported would walk by this thing every day. And we had our standing meeting in front of the board where we went and said, okay, here's a list of all the projects prioritized with ETAs and the executive owners of each of those. And so we would talk about, and then who's working on them. So simple list up there. Why didn't we do it digitally? We did. Part of the problem was all of our clients, even the team members, like, we're not looking at the online version of this. So we put it on this whiteboard. And I said, you are not authorized to work on anything but the things that you were assigned on this board. And if anybody has a problem, any of your customers that they will get mad, their internal customers, point them to me and I will walk them through our method here. And what happened over just a couple weeks, it was very fast, is people then started to trust that process. Mm-hmm. And when somebody would come over, I've got this urgent need here, and I'd say, all right, let's walk over. Is it more important than this project? No. Is it more important than this project? No. Is it more? And then they would see we had the right priorities. We had a couple times where it was more important than some of those top levels. All right, let's move it in there. And we adjusted the list. But people then started to trust the process. It gave people the relief to know that, hey, this decision has been made. Like it's like in the financial, like trying to pay off debts, the snowball method. That's mm-hmm. kind of what it's like. Yep. You focus on these things, and then what happens is we knock these top level, and suddenly people are freed up to work on those next projects. So it's constantly moving and shifting, but it's flexible enough that if something happens in a project that's ranked number 7 suddenly becomes number 1, all right, let's structure that. And we understand it's not just that it moved to number 1 priority. It may have pulled people off of these lower level projects to work on it because it's that top priority. But this is it's a technique to help people focus on those things which are higher impact, time sensitive tasks. Sometimes there's legal ramifications, there's fines, from a compliance standpoint, whatever that could drive that. So you have to find something like this 15-minute stand-up meeting to make sure that people are staying on task. Once that gets drilled into people's minds, then you can lay off of the in-person 10-minute and maybe keep it as a 15-minute call, but make it a call instead of an in-person. And then after a while, people are being responsible and they're checking it daily online, and that you have then a weekly call where you're assessing things.
Yeah, the key is really just to make sure that the entire team knows what the priorities are. They know what their priorities are individually, and the stakeholders understand what everybody's priorities are, to your point, so that everybody knows if something comes in, what's getting moved for that thing to get done. And because I think sometimes, and it doesn't really matter if you have a small team or a large team, you can only accomplish so much work in a given amount of time. And the team has to be clear on who's doing what and when it's going to be done so that you can communicate effectively. And if you don't have enough people, or you don't have, if you don't have enough time, you don't have enough people, then maybe you have to look outside your team to get some assistance.
And this is also where, I mean, tools can help. I'd be careful not to use the tools as a crutch, but leveraging the right tools, and that could be things like, your resource calendars, your traditional, project management tools, Gantt charts, the Kanban list models, like things like Microsoft Planner, project smart sheet, whatever it is that's out there that helps you to visualize the resource capacity. It's what's great about having a tool is making sure you don't miss anything. So a project, a deadline, the people and their schedule, their availability, things like that. The point is that one of the biggest mistakes made is that you're overcommitted on what you're actually able to accomplish.
Yeah.
Well, then you got the whole world of agile and iterative approaches to things. I know that's your world too.
I think Agile done right is probably one of the best methodologies I've ever worked in, and Agile done wrong is probably one of the worst methodologies I've ever worked in. Agile gives you a lot of flexibility around setting goals and working towards goals and treating people like grown-ups. But there's also a lot of checkpoints and a lot of rigor that's thrown into it to allow you to have that flexibility and goal setting ability. And like we always say, it doesn't matter what the methodology is as long as you have one and you use it. So I think Agile is a great way of doing that, but it's not the only way of doing it. There's lots of different ways that you can be successful. It just happens to be one that gets used frequently in the technology space.
Yeah. And really part of this too is that you want to, whenever people get stuck, you just want to be able to break that down into greater detail and understand the more atomic level tasks that need to be completed. That can really go a long way in helping people to get unstuck. Part of what I like about the various agile methodologies out there is, again, you're not trying to, like with the waterfall method, of like do everything in this giant plan, but to break it down into smaller pieces. And so it might be that if it starts to get too complex again, you say, all right, maybe we need to take the current phase and break it into 2 different releases, 2 different phases, if there's a logical space for that. But again, just so that it helps the team see that you get like that sense of accomplishment, you can see the progress in things. But again, you want to reduce the complexity. And that's what a lot of the tools and the methodologies help, is it reduces the complexity and people can get their arms around it.
Yeah, you're getting rid of all of the logistics and the operational pieces and letting people focus on the actual work that needs to be done.
And you'll have a better sense too as how you're utilizing people's time when you have that level of detail. And so you don't have people that are inefficiently being held from working on other projects because they're assigned to this one, which is the high priority, even though the tasks that they're involved with don't kick in for a while. So you're more efficient with your resource usage when you have that level of detail.
Yeah. And I think, so whether you're talking about the pull down method, or whether you're talking about like a Kanban board, or, however a backlog method, the idea of a way to be able to kind of have each person on the team and know how full or not full they are in terms of workload really helps, because if you weren't to look at that, so one of the things that I see a lot is, especially in smaller businesses, you get somebody who's super duper productive and they take on a lot of work themselves, and they're probably really good and they're really busy, but they end up with 87,000 tasks, and then you've got the rest of the team and there's like 1 task, 2 tasks, 3 tasks, right? And using a tool like we're talking about allows you to visualize how that is being assigned out across the team, so that you can say, okay, we don't want this one resource to become overburdened when we have another resource that has bandwidth. We would really like, as much as possible, to make sure that the workload is being dispersed amongst the team as fairly as possible, depending on skill set.
Yeah, it's funny how we do that. I realize that, and I'm a person that has a difficult time sometimes letting go of those tasks, it'd be like I always say to myself, it would take me longer to explain how to go and do it competently, and then for it to competently be done versus I just pile it on and do it, when I can get to it, kind of things, is when you can visually see that the tasks and you'll make better decisions about how you can then move some of those off of someone's plate over to others to take on those pieces. A part of the problem with that is where people have a difficult time is around prioritizing those tasks. Why do people have such a difficult time prioritizing, Sharon? Why is that an issue?
Between decision fatigue and lack of critical thinking skills, I think sometimes, we're not really taught sometimes when we first come into roles how to do that, and it's something that gets learned. It's an experiential thing. I think that as you kind of go further and further in your career, you kind of learn how to make those prioritization decisions. And I know this is, when we talk about resource management struggles, I think one of the things is, especially newer people to the team, and they don't have to be newer to the workforce, but newer to people to the team, sometimes are nervous because they don't understand what the priorities should be. So they lean on the people who have been in the team longer to say, wait, what should I be prioritizing? If it's not being made clear to them at the project level, they don't know what that is. And so I think they look to the project manager or the Scrum Master or somebody on their team to help them make those decisions, because either they don't know the culture, they don't know the team, they don't know the tasks, they don't know the stakeholders well. I think there's all kinds of reasons why people aren't entirely sure how to make those decisions.
I think another reason for this is a failure to make the connection to what are we actually trying to deliver for the business here, the core, the value of that. You lose sight of what are the actual outcomes? What are we trying to accomplish here? Because that then should define, how you prioritize those things. That should help inform everyone working on the project of whether they're working on a high versus low priority thing. If you're looking at a project, I think everybody should be able to articulate, here's what we're trying to accomplish. This is the end goal. This is the outcome we're trying to move towards. And then they'll have a better understanding of how the tasks they're working on help us reach that end goal.
I think that's something that I really enjoyed working in Agile, because I had worked in very, very formal waterfall shops before that, where the projects could go on for 2, 3, 4, 5 years. And, you'd get a year and a half into it and you're like, where am I again? What are we working on? I totally forgot what year it is. All I know is I'm buried in a bunch of data architecture diagrams and report diagrams, and I'm not entirely sure what we're making anymore. And it really did feel like that sometimes. Like when you get in the middle of it, it's gone on so long, like you can't even see the end goal. And one of the things that I really appreciate about Agile is that I do think that an iterative design in general is it helps us to remember what it is we're doing, because we're constantly being drawn back to deliverables and goals and accomplishments and, what is it that I'm doing and why am I doing this and who am I doing it for? And I'm hopefully, demoing to a stakeholder on a regular basis, and I'm getting that immediate feedback so I know if I need to change it or not. But I think, when you're managing all of that, it's nice to be able to kind of work together as a team to know what you're trying to accomplish, as opposed to being lost in the project somewhere.
I was just thinking too of a couple projects that I've been on where we prioritized a little bit differently because we knew that the highest risk was the availability of a few key people. So we actually restructured based on risk prioritization. So we had, we just knew, in this is a real example of one of my PMs that was going to have a baby. And I knew that if we could front load the areas that she was driving while she was there, we had some flexibility that we could do that. It would have been better than to her to drop off the project and be gone for 3 months and us try to backfill later, following that plan. And so we tried to front load that we didn't finish it before she was gone, but we got the majority of it. So we were able to handle that with her leaving. And so we were overall successful. On your comment too, of the waterfall, I often, as I reflect back, one of the most successful projects that I was ever on was an old waterfall. It was an 18-month project that executed over a weekend. It was like over Friday, Saturday, Sunday, went live with, it was a, you've heard me talk about it. It was a data center consolidation, 3-to-1, upgrading of hardware, rollout of new software, like just everything around these systems. And it executed. We were under budget. We were on schedule. And there were certainly downsides that happened, but it was very successful in its execution because of the level of planning and the risk mitigation that we did. But that resulted in positive and negative stories that we're shaping into these discussions that we have. But I did like that idea of going in and constantly, as you're reviewing your plan, to consider your risks and schedule around those risks as best possible. For a risk being, hey, this person that's key is not going to be available.
Yeah. Well, and I think when you identify that as a risk on the project and you're aware of it, to what you just said, you can plan to get the most out of that resource in the way that makes the most sense. Because let's be honest, people do take vacations, have babies, need to be off for time. Maybe they're on a different project for part of it. They get sick.
Other projects, and the other side of all of this too is making sure, as part of your overall communication strategy, and as we always talk about, being transparent, being very upfront about, that's a big part of mitigating risks, is talking about it. Here's the potential for a risk. Here's what we'll do if that comes to fruition. The mistake is to cover that up or not bring potential bad news to the awareness of the stakeholders. Like, no, don't do that.
That's back to the toxic positivity thing, right? We don't want to be toxically positive. We want to plan and we want to be realistically positive, but
the sticker idea. I've still got it here.
We don't want to have toxic positivity in the idea that it's okay, we'll be fine with zero planning and zero effort involved. We still definitely want to, make sure that we're communicating what's actually happening, planning for that, and making sure that we're planning around that to maximize what we do have in terms of resources.
Right. And one of the best ways that you can manage this thing, especially if you're under the constant threat of having resource issues, is that you just need to be talking about it. It needs to be in your risk assessment overall for the project. You need to talk about that incremental progress as part of your regular updates, however often you're doing that. Hopefully at least weekly, that you're providing those updates to your project stakeholders, and that you're very open. Again, you're going to better handle those things if you're upfront, if you are clinical in your approach, the language that you use, and just say that, hey, this is a real risk that we have these people that are overburdened. I think where some people are, as I check in with them, they say they're okay. I can tell that there's signs of burnout that are there. We need to make some adjustments as soon as possible. Have those kinds of conversations, and you're more likely to get the support from your stakeholders, from the leadership, if you're open and having those conversations, versus that person does have a breakdown, takes a sick day that turns into a week because they're burned out, and you're now in jeopardy of your overall timeline and budget. And this is the first time you brought it up to your project stakeholders.
Well, and of course, nobody's cross-trained on any of that. So not only are they literally have nobody to back them up.
Yeah. It's like with anything, it's like sometimes in any healthy project, you're going to have to look at the scope and make some trade-offs. I would always love to go in and deliver everything that was asked for, but my experience has been mostly on the product side of things. You make feature trade-offs, you make adjustments to that and say, hey, look, we just can't finish that in time for this scheduled release. We're going to make the release, but it's only going to have 8 of the 10 features that we had discussed. Here's why, here's where we are. Can you give us more time? Can you give us more budget and personnel to go and achieve? Otherwise, no, we're going to cut back on features to meet the date. Or you let us push back the date to make sure all the features are there.
Yeah,
that's a trade-off. There's no right or wrong on that. It's just a decision that needs to be made by the stakeholders, the project owner.
Yep. Yeah, they have to decide what's important to them. So what do you think are some good practical tips for making sure that we can keep deliverables moving, even though we might be tied on something?
I think the last couple episodes you brought this up first, I think is a great thing, is that first and foremost, I would say, what is that, minimum viable product? Like, what do you have to deliver? This is that critical path approach to the project. And this is where, again, you can start to you have prioritization of what needs to be delivered and say, okay, of your top 10 priorities, here's the 7 we know we can deliver, and we will do our best on the other 3. But here's the priority that we must have these 7 at the very least for us to be able to go live. And then we'll try to get, 8, 9, and 10, and maybe a couple more if we can.
What's really funny is, as a Six Sigma black belt with a lot of experience in lean and being an entrepreneur, running my own business, we live this way. It's really funny how many times even, my husband and I will be doing something. And we're like, well, what's the MVP for this situation? And you start to really think this way. And I think if you think this way as a project manager, you can say, okay, here's what I do have. What's the minimal viable thing that I can get out of this situation that can meet the deliverable, that can meet the need within the time, within the budget, within the scope? And when you start really thinking that way, you start becoming deliverable focused, as opposed to there's all these things that need to happen. I'm never going to get them done. And so that creates that awfulized thinking. Instead, you say, let me adapt to this and let me think, what can I deliver within the time, budget, and scope I have? And then go to your stakeholder, like you were saying, and say, hey, is this enough? Can we do this? And then, keep building on that.
Well, it's important to make a cultural change, and it's not like it's a failure. It's like, look, we have our limited resources. This is just the reality of what it is. Here's what we can do with what we've been given. I choose to approach things as, here's our team. Here's we hire well. We've got this focus. We understand this is what our goal is, the outcomes that we're driving towards. Here's what we can deliver, the time, the constraints that we have, and the other things that we want to do. That'll be version 2 or version 3. And so that's why I love that iterative process, because that's the reality. It's like this was the lie of the waterfall method. It's not like you would ever deliver everything with the waterfall method. There was an iteration that happened during the waterfall and after the project.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when you become deliverable based and you think that way too, it allows you, if you have additional resources, to scale up, and if you have limited resources, to scale down really quickly, because you're using what you have in front of you, and your quality is based on the resources that are at your disposal, and you can kind of scale up and scale down pretty quickly. And it allows your team to be a little bit more kind of like cross-trained and managed, because everybody's focused on what can we do as a team, not what are we not able to do because we're not big enough, or we don't have enough money, or we don't have enough time, or anything like that. It's like, what can we accomplish?
Right. Yeah. No, I love that. Thinking about some of the benefits here of being proactive in your resource management. I think that, if you pointed out, if you change your way of thinking, if you think that way, you're just going to be more efficient. You're going to be more productive in your approach. And that's why, it goes back to, methodology. For years and years and years, my approach to project management was, it all looked pretty much the same way. I found a model that worked and it was flexible. It moved around. It wasn't that it was cookie cutter exactly the same every time, but I had just certain healthy habits and approach to, outlining, organizing, going through and assessing, and then moving forward with the project that worked.
Yep. Yeah,
And then
always make a list, always identify the tasks, always do the estimates, always assign people, always cross-reference. Like you get into these habits of it's kind of like you go through this little checklist in your mind. You've done it so many times, so you're like, you kind of know what to look for. And I think when you are proactive and you've done it so many times, I think you do start thinking about those little things throughout the course of it. But being proactive is a big part of that.
You reduce risk. You stave off burnout from your people, your stakeholders, the executive, the advisors and the owners of the project. They're more satisfied with the outcome there. Again, they're all part of that, and so it also as you become more efficient, then you start being able to expand and deliver more, exceed those expectations. That's always like the goal should always be to exceed expectations, but you want to make sure you're meeting so that you can exceed. If you're not meeting, then if you're taking on too much, you're going to not meet as well as not exceed.
Yep. Yeah. Pleasers do you no good if you're not meeting expectations to begin with.
Yeah. So thinking about some practical, takeaways from this. What's the call to action for people?
I think my comment to this would be, like I was mentioning earlier, focus on the deliverable and the goal, and don't ever think about, we can't do it because, or here's the reasons why we're not going to be successful. Instead, always think about, with what we have at our disposal, what can we accomplish? And think about that MVP, and think about pushing people to their strengths, and think about bringing people together as a team for a common goal, and focus on, trying to get that deliverable and that goal met together.
And just remember that, resource constraints is the real world. Like every project will have them. It's incredibly rare to not have any of those things. And so, you need to have that resource conscious mindset, and be strategic in your prioritization, and then be really good at communication with everybody in the team and with your stakeholders. It sounds like a lot, but again, if you've got that baked into a methodology, if you've got your template built for projects, so you don't remember any of these pieces, it gets to become second nature. It's just your approach. It's just your methodology. Then it's just a matter of getting other people to follow your methodology.
Yeah, because let's be really honest, there's never enough time. There's never enough money. There's never enough people to do things.
And there's never enough time for these episodes because we're already done here, Sharon. So and here we are. And thank you everybody for watching. You want to reach out to us, we're all over socials. You can find us here. You can also go over, we've got a community out on Facebook where you can share some of your stories and tell us how much you love the show, because it's your most favorite webcast series of all time. Gush over us, please. We can handle it. And then, of course, you can find past episodes, everything out on YouTube under Buckley Planet on my page out there. Please follow. Yeah, they're taking off. The episodes are getting more and more views. We're excited to see that. Lots more coming. You can find us here every Monday at 9 a.m. for the rest of our lives. We'll be here doing the show at 9 a.m. Pacific. So please follow us, and we'll catch you at the next episode.
Thanks for watching.
Bye-bye.